Hi, folks. Lance Smith here, kicking off another round of the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. Thrilled you're along for the ride today as we tackle those brain-bending bits of Scripture that leave you muttering, huh? My game plan? To wrestle these tricky questions down to the mat with you, unearth some truth, and grow a little. Whether you've been dog-earing Bible pages since you could crawl, or you're just now cracking it open like a fresh can of soda, it's a team effort. So pour some coffee, get comfy, and let's jump into today's heavyweight. Did God harden Pharaoh's heart? And if so, does Pharaoh still own his stubborn streak? Strap in, friends. Honestly, this one's going to be a doozy. All right, let's set the scene. We're talking about the book of Exodus. Think plagues, Moses, and a showdown with the big boss of Egypt, Pharaoh himself. The question that keeps popping up is, if God hardened Pharaoh's heart, how can Pharaoh be held accountable for digging in his heels and refusing to let the Israelites go? Was he just a puppet on God's string, or did he have a say in the matter? And what does this tell us about God's justice and our own responsibility? These aren't lightweight questions. They're the kind that keeps theologians up at night and give us regular folks a theological headache. So let's roll up our sleeves and get into it. Our key verse today is Exodus 4:21. Here's how it reads in the New Living Translation. And the Lord told Moses, when you arrive back in Egypt, go to Pharaoh and perform all the miracles I have empowered you to do. But I will harden his heart, so he will refuse to let the people go. Boom, there it is. God says, I'm going to harden his heart. That's a bold statement, right? So naturally we wonder, if God's the one flipping the switch, how's it fair to blame Pharaoh for not budging? Let's pull in a classic question from the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, where they write this. The Bible quotes God as saying, I will harden his, Pharaoh's, heart so that he will not let his people go. But if God hardened Pharaoh's heart, then Pharaoh cannot be held morally responsible for his actions, since he did not do it of his own free will, but out of constraint. See 2 Corinthians 9:7 and 1 Peter 5:2. Fair point, right? If someone's twisting your arm or your heart, how can you be guilty? But here's where the Big Book of Bible Difficulties offers a solution. They write this, God did not harden Pharaoh's heart, contrary to Pharaoh's own free choice. The Scripture makes it very clear that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. It declares that Pharaoh's heart grew hard, that's Exodus 7:13, that Pharaoh hardened his heart, Exodus 8:15, and that Pharaoh's heart grew hard the more God worked on it, Exodus 8:19. Again, when God sent the plague of the flies, Pharaoh hardened his heart at this time also, that's Exodus 8:32. This same or like phrase is repeated over and over. See Exodus 9:7, 34-35. In fact, with the exception of God's prediction of what would happen, the fact is that Pharaoh hardened his own heart first, and then God hardened it later. Furthermore, the sense in which God hardened his heart is similar to the way the sun hardens clay and also melts wax. If Pharaoh had been receptive to God's warnings, his heart would not have been hardened by God. But when God gave Pharaoh a reprieve from the plagues, he took advantage of that situation. Okay, let's unpack that. The idea here is that Pharaoh wasn't some innocent bystander who got zapped into stubbornness. He was already leaning into his own pride and defiance, like a guy who's decided he's not leaving the buffet line, no matter how full he is. God's hardening, then, isn't about forcing Pharaoh to be bad. It's more like locking the door after Pharaoh's already chosen to stay inside. I love that clay and wax analogy. It's like God's power is the sunshine, and what happens next depends on what you're made of. Clay, you're baking into a brick. Wax, you're melting into a puddle. Pharaoh, it seems, was all clay and no candle. Now, here's a word we'll circle back to: compatibilism. It's this funky idea that God's will and ours can coexist, like two cooks in a kitchen whipping up a stew without burning the house down. Pharaoh's choosing, God's directing, and somehow it's not a total mess. Keep that in your back pocket. We'll dig into it more later. Now, let's dig a little deeper. Back in Exodus 4:21, God tells Moses up front, "I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will not let the people go." But then, as the story unfolds, we see Pharaoh digging in his heels time and again, plague after plague, until he's practically a human brick wall. So why does he get judged if God's in the driver's seat? One way to look at it is that the Hebrew word for harden here, kazak, doesn't mean God turned Pharaoh into a robot. It's more like strengthen or make firm. Pharaoh's already a proud, cruel tyrant. Check out Exodus 1, where he's enslaving Israelites and tossing their babies into the Nile. God's hardening might just be him saying, "All right, Pharaoh, you want to double down? Let's see how far you'll take it." It's less puppeteering and more amplifying what's already there. And here's the kicker. The text doesn't just pin it all on God. We've got verses like Exodus 8:15 and 8:32, where it says Pharaoh hardened his own heart. It's a two-way street. Picture it like a tug-of-war. Pharaoh's pulling hard against God, and God's like, "Okay, buddy, I'll give you some extra rope and a little push." Pharaoh's choices start the ball rolling, and God uses that stubbornness to show his power and set his people free. It's not God overriding free will. It's God working with Pharaoh's free will to bring about a bigger plan. Now, let's zoom out for a second. This whole thing ties into a massive theological tug-of-war: divine sovereignty versus human responsibility. Does God's control mean we're off the hook? Or does our freedom mean God's just along for the ride? Scripture seems to say, yes, both. And then that leaves us scratching our heads. So what's the deal? First off, Pharaoh's already clenching his fist. Exodus 7:13, 8:15, 8:32 prove he's in the game early. Then God's hardening? It's like pouring gas on a fire Pharaoh lit himself. And it's not a snap decision. It's 10 plagues of chances to rethink his life. Those miracles, they're God showing off. But if you're allergic to truth, they just make you itch worse. Pharaoh's still choosing every step, and it all fits God's plan to flex his muscle and free his people. Now, the MacArthur Study Bible weighs in with this, and I quote, "The theological conundrum posed by such interplay of God's acting and Pharaoh's acting can only be resolved by accepting the record as it stands, and by taking refuge in the omniscience and omnipotence of the God who planned and brought about his deliverance of Israel from Egypt, and in doing so also judged Pharaoh's sinfulness." End quote. All right, John MacArthur, I hear you. God's big enough to handle it all. But honestly, this feels like saying it's a mystery, deal with it. I'm not throwing shade. It's just not the most satisfying answer for a guy like me who likes to peek under the hood. So is this even a contradiction? The folks at Veritas Domain dropped this gem on September 24th, 2020, where they write this: "Given that the Bible teaches the compatibilism of human will and God's will, we don't have a contradiction if some passages shows God hardened Pharaoh's heart, while others taught Pharaoh hardened his own heart. Technically, in light of the Bible's teaching of compatibilism, these verses would be contradictory if the verses taught only God hardened the Pharaoh's heart, or only Pharaoh hardened the Pharaoh's heart. Or another set of possibilities, in order for the Bible to be contradictory here, is if these verses taught God did not harden the Pharaoh's heart, or Pharaoh did not harden his own heart. But none of those verses supply these claims. All right, there's that word again, compatibilism. It's like saying God's will and ours can dance a duet without stepping on each other's toes. The Bible doesn't say only God or only Pharaoh. It's both somehow. Imagine a jam session where God's the lead guitarist and Pharaoh's riffing his own stubborn solo. It's weird, but it does work. Eric Raymond, in his August 6th, 2009 piece, adds this singer. Well, how did God harden Pharaoh's heart? God simply revealed himself. He revealed his power, supremacy, love for his people, hatred of sin, etc., through the signs and wonders of the plagues. It was this revelation of God that hardened his heart. Some say it's not fair that God hardened his heart. Well, God revealed. He showed himself to Pharaoh through signs and plagues. It was this revelation that hardened his heart. It is a biblical axiom that revelation, devoid of illuminating grace, hardens sinful hearts. All right, that's deep. Think of God's plagues like a megaphone blasting truth. For Moses, it's a rally cry, let's go. For Pharaoh, it's nails on a chalkboard, making him clamp his ears tighter. Same sound, different ears. Here's an analogy I found. Picture a guy who's mad enough to punch his boss, but too chicken to swing. He grabs a shot of whiskey. Liquid courage, right? The booze doesn't make him hate his boss. It just gives him the guts to do what he's already itching to try. Same deal with Pharaoh. His heart's already set on defiance. And God's like, here's a little boost to keep you swinging. The choice was Pharaoh's. God just turned up the volume. Tim Mackey, in his May 26, 2017 article, drops this nugget, and I'll paraphrase. In Pharaoh and Moses' first clash, that's Exodus 7:13-14, Pharaoh's heart became hard. The Hebrew verb kazak doesn't say who started it. It's neutral. Some translations fudge it as was hardened, pinning it on God too soon. But check the pattern. The first 5 plagues, Pharaoh's either hardening the heart himself or it's ambiguous. Last 5, God steps in more. It's like Pharaoh's building a wall and God hands him the mortar after he's halfway done. All right, so is God unfair here? No. Pharaoh had every chance to back off. 10 plagues, 10 shots to say, okay, I'm done. He didn't. God's hardening didn't cause his rebellion. It sealed it. It's like giving a kid a megaphone after he's already yelling. You didn't make him loud. You just made him louder. The takeaway, resist God, and you might find your stubbornness growing. Humble yourself, and his power lifts you up instead. So what about us? Are we pulling a Pharaoh, ignoring God's nudges like they're spam calls? Maybe it's that grudge we're nursing or that habit we won't kick. Pharaoh's story says, hey, don't let your heart turn to concrete. It's a warning with a wink. Soften up, folks, while God's still dialing your number. All right, we've tangled with Pharaoh and survived. Time to wrap this up and let it simmer. So that's all for today, gang. We've wrestled with Pharaoh, God's sovereignty, and a little Hebrew vocab. Hope your brain's still intact. And by the way, if you like the episode, do me a solid, hit that like and subscribe button wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, YouTube, or that other app that your cousin recommended. It keeps us rolling and wrestling with more Bible head scratchers together. This is Lance Smith signing off. Until next time, wishing you good luck, good health, and God bless. So long, everybody.